So I figure it's just after the eating, so I hope you will be very attentive. And I thank you for being able to be here. I will present some research which is part of my postdoc in LATTS. So LATTS is Laboratoire Territoire Technique Société, which is in the Université of Paris-Est Marne-la-Vallée. I think if you do some challenge of having a longer name of your laboratory and your university, I have a chance to win, and I'm financed by this organization that's called Institut de Recherche Innovation Sociale. So what I want to do today is to tell a story about, and to tell it in a way I kind of I have a double formation. So I'm a political scientist and I'm a sociologist of science, and I want to stress both parts of it today. So looking at energy scenarios as a socio-technical object at one point, and how the socio-technical object emerged and how it different uses of it, and secondly as a public policy instrument. So looking at what democratic effects it has, and with my thesis or my hypothesis, my research hypothesis is that these effects are indeed ambiguous. It can be lead to openings in energy discourse or to closing. So three parts or three main ideas. First of all, what is scenario thinking and when it was applied to energy policy. So there's specificities of how this instrument of scenarios came to be, and specificities, of course, of the energy field where it was applied then, which was not the field where it was developed in the first place. Then its uptake by a social movement, by the anti-nuclear movement, actually in Germany, in order to formulate alternative visions of the future. And so this is kind of the twist of my story that I'm telling. So looking at how this instrument, by going from one arena to another, also changed in its effects on energy discourse. And at the end, then I will make some reflections on scenario and democracy in the energy field, and I hope you will have perhaps some reactions to these, because they are working hypotheses. So it's after eating, so I thought perhaps some images would be nice. So I don't know if you know this film, so Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Bomb, which is a great film, by Stanley Kubrick. And which is also an interesting film from an STS perspective, because it's the main character, or it's not really the main character, but it's the character that is in the name, Dr. Strangelove. One of the figures it was made after, or it represents, is Haman Khan. Haman Khan, who is one of the figures of futurist thinking after the Second World War, and who worked for the RAND Corporation and developed there some techniques of how to think about the future. And so we have some of his books here on escalation, thinking about the unthinkable in the 80s. But the most important one, and the one that was most discussed, is on thermonuclear war. It came out in 1960. Of course, on thermonuclear war is an allusion to on war, Clausewitz, and it develops the scenario methodology on grounds of a very particular political situation, which is the Cold War, and which is the Eisenhower doctrine of massive retaliation. That means the American policy at that time was whatever the Soviets do, as we think they are in advance to us in terms of military force, especially conventional military force. Whatever they do, our response will be massive nuclear retaliation. And so this was a way of saying using nuclear weapon in order not to fight war. Because of course, when you take this seriously, and you think that you have massive retaliation for every little attack, the consequences that there will be no attack. Well, Herman Kahn and some others around him thought that this strategy was not credible. It is not credible, he said, that if for saving, for example, South Korea, America would risk annihilation, would risk tens or hundreds of millions of dead. And he said, well, this is a way not to think actually about the future. It's a way of excluding the future. And what I want to do is to think about nuclear war as something that is possible, that is plausible, that can be won. And so to make scenarios about which future states of the world are possible in different kinds of nuclear wars. It was, of course, criticized as a very cynical exercise. So he has different scenarios with tens of millions of dead, hundreds of millions of dead, whatever. And but he says, well, there are tragic but distinguishable post-war states, and if we think about nuclear war, we have to think about these different states and about the different kinds of trade-offs that they represent. What is interesting about this story is that the scenario technique then combines two things, and you have that in the name, on-term nuclear war. So it combines something, there's a very new situation, nuclear bomb, and so you have to think about things that you were not used to think about. So you have to use imagination in order to be able to foresee what can happen. And at the same time, building on war, Clausewitz, so there are some rules. There are some ways of formulating this that can be plausible, and so you can tell coherent stories. So it's this kind of a scientific approach. Well, to make it very quick, then this kind of thinking about the future was also developed in other places. There were exchanges, etc. One of the places which is very important is France, the French planning circles. So here you have a stamp, which is the 9th plan. So the Commissariat Général du Plan, which was the French planning bureau, actually developed its own way of thinking about the future. Of course, with you see it on the stand, moderniser la France, so with this modernizing idea, so a technocratic way of conceiving different types of futures, different scenarios for the future in order to be able to modernize France in that sense. And you have different uses, just to be also clear about this, different uses of scenarios. So here you have one exercise of data, which is another agency, French agency, who adopted the scenario methodology because it provided a nice way to make visible a possible evolution of French demography and French geography for the future, and scénario de l'inacceptable. So it was to present a scenario, if we do nothing, this will happen. So this is a catastrophic scenario with desertification of many places of France, etc. And so it brings another element to scenario thinking, which is scenarios are used or are interesting because they can represent, make visible, complex phenomena in an understandable way. So you have all these things make that you have a kind of an ambivalence about scenarios. You have imagination and coherence, so it has to be coherent and at the same time imagined. It's science-based, but it has to be, that's Hanan Khan who says it, but it's also in the base of these data scenarios, a lived experience, so it has to be something that people can imagine when they see it. It is a tool of central planning and also a tool that can help to exchange with stakeholders. Here, to be very quick, then applying scenarios to energy. I will not go into detail because you know these stories. So the oil crisis, of course, is a major shock for the Western world, and entails the necessity to change quite radically the energy systems. And at the same time, you have the development of a new technology, so civil nuclear energy, which forces to think the long term for financial reasons, especially, but not only. And so, applying scenarios to energy was a means to trigger change, while taking at the same time into account path dependencies, which are very important in the energy field, and if I understand well, the next presentation will tell us more about it. So, what happens then is an interesting twist, and that's where my studies are, what I'm studying. So you have this tool which comes from a technocratic discourse, which is a way also of formulating this, which has been a way of formulating technocratic agreements about, for example, about nuclear futures, about etc., which gets taken up by the anti-nuclear movement in Germany with a report first in 1980, Energiewende, so energy transition or energy turnaround. From a small institute at that time, the Öko-Institut, and with the authors being mainly interested in, so it has two parts, the report. It has a technical part, it has a more social part, but essentially it is a report that introduces itself in this kind of technocratic discourse, but by presenting a very different future. And so the thesis here would be that scenarios became at that moment a tool to represent an alternative policy narrative in the energy. This is just to show that the name Energiewende was coined in this report, and if you look then at Google Scholar, you can see an explosion of the use of this term, and so you see that this report became very influential later. Now, a third way of, or a third story about energy scenarios are scenarios used. So scenarios in a parliamentary enquête commission. So this is an enquête commission now in 1987 on climate. Schutz der Erde is called the report, but it's on climate and the ozone layer. And I use it, or I present it here, because it has also a very interesting way of using scenarios. So what is the context of this parliamentary enquête commission? 1987, of course, it's just after Chernobyl. So huge fight about nuclear power in Germany, to the point that even that the question was very difficult to discuss between experts in parliament. at the same time, it's the beginning of the climate issue becoming a public problem in Germany. And so this parliamentary enquete commission is commissioned to elaborate ways to respond to the climate challenge. So to lower CO2 emissions from energy, of course. And in the political discourse then establishes, there's an objective that is established, which is minus 25% CO2 emissions until 2005, which is a very ambitious target. So what does the Commission do? The Commission proposes then, and you have to know that parliamentary enquete commissions in Germany are composed by politicians and by scientists. And so it's a scientific and a political exercise at the same time. And in order to respond to this 25% reduction objective, the Commission makes a very smart move. Instead of presenting a set of measures that should be taken in order to respond to the challenge, it presents 3 scenarios, saying these 3 scenarios represent 3 different options that we can take in order to respond to this challenge. One is with more nuclear. One is at the same time quitting nuclear energy. And the third one is led to the market. We set the incentives and the market does the rest. So we don't take a stance on nuclear energy. And what is interesting then is that these 3 types of scenarios, the Commission was not at all mandated to say something about nuclear energy only. But of course, these in the context of the debate, these 3 scenarios were taken up, were discussed, were taken into the public sphere, and were taken up by different political groups in the public discourse. What is interesting then also is that these 3 energy paths, when you look at them, they're not really, and that was also what was stressed in public discourse, they're not really comparable. They're not just 3 different ways of doing the same thing. They represent also different types of cosmologies, if you want, so different types of seeing, of conceiving what is the role of the state, what is the role of the market, what is the role of technology, how technology will evolve. And so 3 different futures, not only from a purely energetic point of view, but from a societal point of view. So I'm coming to the end. What is interesting, or why represent these 3 types of stories and the history of this object? It's the first of all, in energy, like in other socio-technical controversies, it's very clear that the future is a battleground on which you have to fight if you want to influence the present. So this is not only true for energy, but it's particularly true for energy because of the long-path dependencies and because of the long-term effects of political decisions. Second point that emerges from this research is that there are windows of opportunity in some way in the political constellations of the moment for the emergence of alternative futures. So the 1980s in Germany were a moment where the political system allowed the emergence of an alternative to nuclear energy. Inversely, scenarios can play a role because they have this function of rendering visible complex matters. They can also serve, of course, to make an option and so make social groups give them more power and give them the power to change some ways of seeing energy. And last, this is my last slide. You see dynamics of what I would call politicization and depoliticization of energy issues. So if you look now, it's more a question on the micro level. If you look at the micro level of how the scenarios are constructed, you can look at the construction and deconstruction of path dependencies, of course, and of the way science policy boundary is negotiated. And this way, the use of the scenarios by the Parliamentary Enquete Commission in Germany was very interesting, because finally, this is a citation from the Commission. The Commission decided to present not only the commonly agreed positions, but to continue the discussions in political and public domain, so to come to further results. It means the scenarios were also a way of giving back, of saying, well, scientifically we cannot decide this. It has to go back to political.
Stefan, a little time for questions. It will take us a short call, having 3 questions. Back in there, respond. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Thank you for the presentation. I found it very interesting. Also, the movie you write is very interesting movie. Everybody should. My question is provoking in some way. So, are your main message the same as some physicians used to say that modeling is good for nothing, but we need to do it in order to discuss? Is this your main message?
Okay, thank you.
You talked about using the future to act in the present. I was wondering about kind of reverse of that, but using the future to avoid acting. So one example would be, so the UK has these the most ambitious carbon reduction targets in the world. They set it in 2050, and there's maybe argument that essentially that strategy was chosen because it allows to do something about climate, but actually doing anything about it. So we put it all in the future to that and save us around for it now.
One more back.
Yes, I was wondering if you're also going to look at roadmaps as part of this, the act of laying out how to get from A to Z, and if in some ways scientists have been or are part of laying the ground rules for what is possible going through those steps, or if that becomes an entirely political act in the same way that after the scenario has been calculated, so to speak, they lay out how to implement it in society.
Okay, yeah, perhaps the first and the last one might perhaps go together. So, is modeling good for nothing, and how is? I mean, there's a range of techniques from pure revisionist modeling of demand to completely political roadmaps. And I think what I think is interesting is not to make general statements about how do scenarios or what scenarios are in the group, but to look in detail in what political constellation and in what how they are used, in fact. So I think it's very different. For example, now you have in Germany also the energy concept, which is kind of a scenario, but which is actually which is compared to what you have here, which is official governmental policy, which has been stated as such, and so it has a completely different status. So looking in detail at how scenarios are used, taken up by actors, produced, it tells us something about the energy discourse and about the energy policy and the actors that are involved. So, what is this? And use the future for action and inaction. Yeah, that's of course a very very, very good way of putting it also, because when you look at these long-time objectives, it was also 25% was also one of those. But it was, of course, the scenarios can also be used in order not to decide, and that's what happened. So I'm reading it as a way of deciding to giving it back to the political system. At the same time, it's also postponing a decision.
Okay, well, there's plenty more scope for discussion, but thank you very much. Next in our lineup is Gerhard. That's okay. Good.
So I think first I have to apologize for two reasons. I did catch a cold, not here in this one, but back home. Therefore I'm a little bit at least speech challenged, but I hope things will work out fine. And secondly, I have to apologize because I did not change the title of my presentation, but I did change the content of my presentation. Sorry about this, but since about 3 weeks I'm working on a new project that compares energy transitions, and it's a very quick-moving project. And I thought it would be a good opportunity here to give some first thoughts about what I'm thinking about energy transitions. And in this project, of course, we are having the German part on energy transitions. What I think is important with respect to past dependence and past creation and the German energy transition. Okay, as we all know, transition, especially in electricity infrastructures, and this will be my point of reference, electricity infrastructures seem on the one hand to be necessary, we all want to have them in one way or the other, but they are obviously very hard to achieve. So there's a whole book by Verbong and his colleagues really saying, oh God, we've not achieved much in spite of all the attempts. And without any doubt, one reason for this is that past dependence in electricity infrastructures looms large. It's a very important issue. And along with past dependence do come a couple of lock-in effects, negative as well as positive lock-in effects, which are responsible for these difficulties. But nevertheless, if you're looking at how the electricity system has been developing over the last couple of decades, there is lots of change actually going on. And what I'm somewhat asking here, what's this relationship between transition that we want to have as past creation and past dependence? Could there be a couple of conceptual challenges connected to this question? First of all, in my mind, we are detecting too much past dependence, and this is something to do with the fact that, of course, if we want to have new structures, if we want to create new structures, they always have to build on something. Those structures do not come out of the heaven or fall on earth, but every new structure that is being developed has to build on ongoing interactions between actors or what have you. So there's always an element of something that is there. And now what we have to look at is to what extent are these new structures or structures that are developing something new? How deep are they going and how quickly are they developing in order for us to be able to assess where past dependence is developing towards something like past creation. And if you're talking about a path, I always have to think about actors. So we've heard a lot about systems or what have you. So I think when we talk about past dependence, we have to think about actors who are traveling a specific path. And when we talk about actors traveling a path, we can say, okay, actors determine we are going this path, we are following this path, and then new actors come along and say, ooh, I do not want to travel this path, let's take a detour, let's go to the left or to the right, and there might be some quarrel about what to do to the next. If they are dissatisfied, the actors can say, no, I don't go with you. We might have the same aim, but I'll take a very different path. And of course, this path can lead somewhere, but of course, it can also lead nowhere. So, under this direction, if you're looking at what has been done over the last couple of years with respect to change, happening or not happening, then we can see that there have been a lot of efforts to look at these new actors, challenger actors or new technologies that are being developed in niches or what have you. What's kind of under-researched in my mind is that, of course, path dependence and the aim to create a new path is a process that entails a lot of conflicts. So there is something like maybe a battle going on between those actors who want to continue on a given path and those actors who want to have different direction for this path. And when we think about electricity, infrastructure position in Germany, we have to, of course, first to ask us, what is the potential battle all about? What are the quarrels all about? And this kind of newest transition that I'm looking at, that we are interested in Germany, deals with basically two lines of conflict that are already allured before. One is what type of energy should be used. On the one hand, we have this fossil nuclear path. On the other hand, we have this new renewable energy sources path. And secondly, we have the line of conflict between centralized and decentralized architectures. So this is a two-way conflict, and it's not reducible from one or the other. But the big thing is that this recent wave of energy transition debate brings these two lines of conflict together. So if you would look at the history of the German electricity system over the last 100 or little more years, then you would find that there always has been something like a conflict between centralized and decentralized structures, and most of the time the proponents of centralized structures have won. And in this new phase of transition discussion, there is this additional element in here that technology basis also has been more intensely discussed. So actually in this transition period, I see something like a phase one that is starting somewhere in the late 80s, where the incumbents do live a relatively stable, unchallenged life. You can see this if you look at what the utilities, the big utilities were doing until the late 90s. It was actually not that much. So if you compare, for example, the expenses of the big utilities for research and development, nothing much compared to other German industrial sectors, and there was a heavy reliance on fossil fuel and nuclear power-fired plants. So very strong centralized structure and a heavy opposition against these slowly arising moves, political plans to support renewable energies. So there actually was a successful attempt to suppress major efforts on the political level to do something about the renewables. They were not so much concerned about so-called local niches. I think that you can see very markets that have a more oligopolistic structures. The big actors are concentrated on the main market, and small local niches are there and not to worry about. And overall, we have here a significant technological lock-in, fossil fuel, nuclear power, cognitive lock-in. This is the way to go. And a political lock-in insofar as this strategy is politically supported and enshrined. What you have on the other hand is new actors who want to develop something like a new path, consisted in the beginning basically of concerned scientists, concerned citizens who want to develop new solutions for electricity generation, mainly coming out of the anti-nuclear power movement in Germany. So cognitively, we're dealing, you also could see from book covers before, something like a green solution. And this idea was turned into practice by some local coalitions, in which these concerned citizens and scientists played a very important role, and were experimenting with technological solutions on a local level. This became supported by interest groups that were formed, or interest groups that were already existing, but did get something like an idea that it was something that they should care about as well. So it was a real niche.
You do 10 minutes.
Okay. This was a real niche development, if you want to stick to this terminology, insofar as there was probably insecurity about the regulatory framework, because there was no real regulatory framework for what was happening there. And also during this time, for the first time, the solar industry in Germany shut down in the mid-90s because of a lack of a regulatory framework. They said we cannot do anything in Germany because there's no framework for developing renewables. So the leading actors, individual skilled actors, and some NGOs. So the second part of phase 2 of this transition started around 1998 and was somewhat to 2008. For the incumbents, this was something like an expansion on the old path. And the triggering event was liberalization. During the late 90s we had liberalization, and liberalization strengthened the few surviving utilities who by merger and acquisitions developed something like a very powerful position within the German market. So 4 regional quasi-monopolists survived. They had to suffer the loss of their network infrastructure, but nevertheless the basic business model, so to say, owned energies, fossil, nuclear, and centralized infrastructure was kept alive and was in effect strengthened by the process of liberalization. And what they were kind of doing strategically was to fight for further life extension of the nuclear power plants, and with respect to coal especially, they were toying with CCS technology in order to make their existing coal-fired power plants more accepted. Over these years they built few new installations, which I think that you find in other liberalizing markets as well. New installation in power plants could not fulfill the expectations with respect to profits, so they were very reluctant to do something new, but otherwise they were globalizing, building up their position, reinforcing dynamics and intentional agency. But also, with insight, you could say, bounded rationality in high velocity environments, because they were not thinking about any alternative strategies in this quickly changing environment. With respect to the challenges, very interestingly, something totally unrelated. So here, in the late 90s, for the incumbents, we had liberalization as a triggering effect. We had here for the challengers, the supporters of decentralized system based on renewable energies, we had a new regulatory framework initiated by a new federal government. And the idea behind this new regulatory framework was that you should build not a uniform framework for the whole electricity sector, but a specialized framework only for the renewables. So this is one way of trying to reform something that's very typical for Germany, where we have thick institutional environments, and existing institutions are very difficult to reform, to change. So a method chosen very often is to build new institutions for new problems. What happened then was a very unexpected, quick, dynamic development of the renewables. Along with this dynamic development, the support coalition for renewables was broadening. So it was not any longer only a green solution, but it was, from the point of view of industrial policy, structural policy, and what have you, very interesting. And in effect, what happened was a very strong industry development. So, for example, in Germany then, not only was Germany the most important place for the installation of photovoltaic modules, but for a couple of years, Germany also became the biggest producer of photovoltaic modules. Along with this came certain attempts to go big, more centralized, like development of offshore wind farms, solar farms, Desertec initiative, etc. So this element of the past, so the clear complementarity between strategy and market development, so there was rapid growth, a search for economies of scale, which was both successful, where the prices in the renewable market declined very drastically, and the leading actors in this period was very much the renewables industry. I mean, you can see this kind of separation of renewables on the one hand and traditional electricity on the other hand. If you look at the ownership structure of renewables, data from 2012, where you can see that the big utilities, the big four, at the bottom of this diagram, own only 5% of the renewables. So till 2008, even up to 2012, the main idea was to stick to the old path, where the new path was left to these various types of new action. Good, we're entering now to phase 3, with difficult for the situation, both for the incumbents as well as the challengers. So this very dramatic growth and unforeseen growth of the renewable sector finally seems not to be able to be stopped, in spite of the fact that the new government that came in 2008 did a lot of things to stop the growth of renewables. They were not able to do it. And besides this, after Fukushima, the federal government decided that the nuclear power plants have to be phased out. Some of them have to be shut down immediately. And in addition to this, the difficult situation on the energy market as such forced the utilities to close down also other conventional power plants. So what you do have here at this situation is that the old business model for the utilities is gone. There is no viable business model any longer, which then shows it can be shown also that their shares slump, companies are downsizing, employees are fired, and since there's a new idea, a new strategy by the old people, old utilities gradually have replaced their old management with leads and replaced them by new people. So at the moment there is still open discussion what will come next. So the incumbents try to push the idea of capacity markets that would help them to continue to run their old power plants, and the idea about quota regulations, and to try to picture them maybe as service providers, but not any longer energy providers for the energy transitions. On the other hand, the challengers are not doing so good as well. Once, because of this already mentioned worsening regulatory framework, it makes it less favorable to continue the development of renewables. It is nevertheless still growing, but it's something like an unintended effect. In the same way as the growth of renewables in the beginning, after the late 90s, was an unintended effect, so to say. It's still kind of unintended, it is still growing so heavily. And this idea that renewables go separate is now increasingly given up, and attempts are made to integrate renewables in the overall electricity market. So no niches any longer. So you have two paths that are now being, in one way or the other, joined again. The renewable industry faces hard times. The solar industry, for the second time in Germany, has gone bust. And the support coalition is at the moment in a very difficult position. 2 slides. Decentralization nevertheless is going on. But not so much due to these elements I've mentioned before, but since about 2008, a lot of different elements play an important role where a variety of actors are trying to develop a new architecture for electricity generation. But there's a lot of community activism going on, so energy is a topic that mobilizes people in Germany still. There are a lot of communities who are trying to become 100% renewables. There's a process of renegotiation of network concessions going on. The new energy providers are coming to the fore. And finally, there is also some independent electricity production that becomes ever more important with rising energy prices, that renewable energies are produced and harvested not with the aim to put it into the grid, but to use this energy by the people who are actually producing it by themselves. So what's next? So we are without any doubt in the phase of transition. That is happening here. Theoretically, all possibilities can be foreseen. One is that all incumbents stabilize on a new basis, meaning, for example, capacity markets and voter regulations that would help them to survive. They would do something different, but as actors, they would still be there and could also kind of build up on their old architecture, more centralized architecture idea. Other possibility would be that we have a continuing trend towards decentralization. If no solution can be found, so at the moment there are negotiations between the potential partners of the new government. They have not found a solution at the moment, but maybe they cannot find a solution, then there will be a sustained period of uncertainty, or something like a differentiation of the electricity market will take place with different actors to fulfill different tasks. Good. That's basically the end of my short presentation today. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take 2 questions. Off the back.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just wondering, I was astounded by the graph you put up actually, that the large embedded players only own 5% of renewables. I thought it was much more in the case of Germany. I thought it would have been much more progressive and able to take over that niche. And I'm wondering if you've had any close interactions with the people in charge of thinking strategically for some of these utilities, and if they've explained some of the reasoning behind why they're lagging on ownership there.
Because there was positive feedback. I mean, up to 2008, there was no necessity to rethink. If you just would consider how your profits develop, how your business is going. Up to 2008, things were fine, and they did even succeed with the new conservative liberal coalition to fight for an extension of the running times of the nuclear power plants first. So. And nobody did know what this actually meant. It meant a lot, so there was no immediate pressure if you are cognitively convinced that your business model working to rethink it. And if you talk nowadays with people working for these utilities, I mean, you get the impression that they still not really know what to do, but that there's a widespread feeling of uncertainty what they should be doing next, so they were not prepared to change their business model, and strategically they have not yet developed real good alternative business models.
And I just find that so fascinating, because particularly because it's strategic decision making under uncertainty, the approach would be to spread out your eggs instead of putting them all in one basket. I'll let others comment.
Two more questions.
Just one little remark to that. I think one of the reasons was because Germany, we have this feed-in tariff that guarantees a very, it has a little risk for investors, but it's also quite low return on investment. And I think this just added to the community thinking of, well, it's more generation capacity, kilowatts or little number of megawatts, but it's also very low return on investment. So the utilities probably just thought that, let's leave this to the citizens, or it's just you can also carry the money to the bank and just say, hey, I want a little return on investment. But it probably wasn't just wasn't economically attractive with these little return on investment. My question would be, you were talking about niches and incumbents, and when we're thinking about the story that's behind there, you have the incumbent who's powerful at the beginning, and the actor in the niche who's little, and then in the end, the niche actor will actually take over the field. And then you were saying in the beginning, renewables have been a niche technology, and now they went to mass market. And I was just wondering, is there the market? Could you say that the ultimate goal is actually just for renewables to take over the electricity market, which has only been existing for 15 years anyway, as you just said? Or how can we conceptualize that the market probably also needs to change to accommodate these new actors and technologies?
It's a very interesting question. I think in some ways it's an open-ended process. So actors have changed over these three phases. So these are different actors. So these actors who have been very active in the first phase are mostly not there anymore. So in the first phase there was these kind of very enthusiastic people who were trying to work put in something like a new green vision of our electricity system, rearrange, decentralize, and etc. And in the second phase, due to this very rapid market developments, you have different type of actors now coming in. So actors who are mainly interested in kind of the commercial benefits that you could get out of this development. But with the end of this phase, where the industry is now disintegrating, not only the solar, but the grid industry is also, it's difficult. It's an open question who will be the driving actors for the further development of the renewables. I see this as an open question. On the one hand, it could be these decentralized initiatives that I've mentioned before, but they are facing a lot amount of uncertainty. Or it could be the big utilities who finally reorient themselves, and with the feed-in tariff most probably gone, then there will be new models, quota models, or whatever, and this might provide some new incentives for them to do something.
Okay. So I think we're up to time.
Okay.
Thank you once again. Thanks very much.
So I apologize because my English is not perfect. But for this reason I really decided to read the presentation. Well, I come from the University of Santiago in Chile, and to present you today this work called Seeds of Destabilization and Energy Regimes. This presentation shows the preliminary ideas related to research in progress. I use energy transition in Chile while introducing the notion of seeds besides the energy transition approach. The concern that is causing energy policies to take a more sustainable path has focused attention on the dynamic of governance and in the destabilizing processes of fossil fuel regimes. Much has been written about the complex nature of energy transitions over a cycle of 30 and 40 years. However, there is a scarcity in the literature around this subjective aspect that we suggest enter as intruders in energy regimes, conforming different geographies in its recent history. Here we present the Chilean energy regime in three general transitions between 1900 and 2012. highlighting the entry of seeds of destabilization and, well, now on seeds, more short. That favor the formation of crises, failures, and obstructions within the regime. We describe the subsequent eruptions on energy policy and legislations. Finally, we reflect on how these seeds have resulted in a much less coherent scenario, complicating assumptions about the context of governance and transition in energy regimes in general, and particularly in Latin America. Well, from the multi-level evolutionist perspective, the rhythms of transformation of the regime measure are different to those occurring in the micro, micro, and in the landscape macro. Their destabilization are conceived in long-term thinking. Likewise, we propose that through the presentation of the energy regime, is it possible to present underlying intangible structures, general common sense, beliefs about the massive energy markets. These co-evolve with reliable technologies and shared knowledge, presenting the discourse of major political parties in hegemonic cultures. The importance of what is at stake renders participants in the regime capable of extending their conviction regarding to the best way to realize change. If, in fact, regime members are defined as heterogenic nature, this study prioritizes a systemic view to represent them. In this case, the representation of the functional processes of energy regimes causes the heterogenic nature of the members to be lost. Well, with the same interest as the socio-technical energy studies in the destabilization of fossil fuel regimes, we propose the incorporation of contribution by post-structuralists. Well, who invite us to broaden our view from the functionalist perspectives of the regime to consider their performative processes and everyday practices. For this purpose, we introduce the idea of seeds in socio-technical regimes to partially contribute to the integration of other actors and practices in the analysis interested by the infrastructures of provisions, everyday practices, and energy transitions. Here we propose presenting the seeds as the regime through qualitative methods, incorporating discursive evidence, images extracted from newspaper and personal memories, which serve to present narratives which make the seeds visible. In this case, we will consider the appearance of seeds around, above, below, and crossing one of the initial privatized energy regime in the world, the Chilean energy regime. Finally, this preliminary proposal reaching the vocabulary of the dynamic of the fossil energy regime, incorporating collisions, natural events, crises, maintenance, failures, and parasites from everyday practice. Let us consider that alongside the semi-coherent rules of the functioning energy regimes and the disposition of these subjects, actors can be seen as tensor, vectors, sedimentation lines, fracture lines, or fissures are also found. The geometry of the regime is dynamic, and it establishes itself through vectors passing over and underneath each other, crossing and returning to collide with the principal courses, provoking collisions that result in singular affectation of themselves. Well, from cell definition of parasites, we focus on the capacity to interrupt transmission of being an uninvited guest, organisms which take without giving, that look for food resources within its host, in this case the regime, I suppose, and affect this in a similar way to the vectors previously described. Thus, the center of control is destabilized by the action of these parasites who act as a type of thermal exciter, catalyzing the regime towards a new equilibrium. These seeds embrace movements of misalignment or those belonging to the undisciplined behaviors resulting from precarious maintenance practices of the teams, constantly cleaning, adjusting, and lubricating, etc. within the courses of the regime. These diversions muffle the normal socio-technical sounds of the regime, allowing the entry of grime, noises, and obstacles whose accumulations becomes key and the dysfunction of the regime. As quasi-objects, the parasites lack their own identities every day. Everything depends on their position in the game. Brown recognized in Cell's definition the role of the joker in pack of cards, able to generate new alternatives in the game. In the same way, according to Lezaun, this increase in the interconnectivity between actors also leads to a political intensification. This also means the emergence of new collectives that conform new expected behaviors within the principal currents. Finally, parasitic cascades may occur, resulting in a reorganization of research, new calculations regarding the consumers. In these ways, we can consider them as possible adapters of the regimes, whose particular narratives open the door to other intruders. We acknowledge the entry of the seeds in the interstices of the history of the energy regime as singular events making their mark, causing obstructions and perhaps facilitated by parasitic cascades that were emerged in the regime histories. Well, the traditional transition of the Chilean energy regime, the presentation of the Chilean energy regimes coincides with influence of financial, economic, and political, cultural factors, technological transference, norms, and legislative which relapse into the business sectors within a period around 40 years. Here we can see the typical three transitions and establishments, and then nationalization, and the last one is the privatization and transnationalization. Well, in the background of the previous history, we propose showing the fissures, deviations, and those who unwanted interfere, other actor, other quasi-objects. Well, the electrification of Santiago, which began in October 1901, brought many associated problems. Collisions between tram, telegraph, and electricity cables resulted in widespread explosion, fires, and even electrocutions. With this fire and electrocution hazards for people and horses incorporated into the electrical regime, the MP Robinet expresses the concern that a more major disaster might be on the brink of occurring in session of the 8th July of 1902, as you can read in this slide. Okay. Well, the earthquake of 1906 corroborated concern with the spontaneous fire produced from the crossing of the telegraph wires with the electricity cables. While the electrical baseload power system was apparently running smoothly, in 1998 Chile suffered one of the most severe droughts in its history. Drought could no longer be considered as a natural catastrophe but as a constitutive risk. Electrical generators were forced to modify their behavior and to start to work with a more far-sighted view. Once a state of drought is announced, the companies operating the hydroelectricity dams should react accordingly to protect their clients. However, in the 1998 crisis, the power generators protected their own interest, avoiding the announcement of deficit. Furthermore, they did not cover the fulfillment shortages. Increasing energy demands caused investors to look to Argentina for natural gas supplies at an attractive economical price while respecting free market conditions. Upon this basis, the Chilean and Argentine governments signed the Gas Integration Protocol in 1995. This later provoked the dash for Argentine gas. Optimism in this technology and the combined cycle gas tooling began to wane, first in part during 2003 and then abruptly in 2007 after the Argentine government entered into financial crisis and became unable to export the natural gas as agreed to Chile. Modification to turbines and to the regulated price directly affected consumers who faced increasing in their bills. The return to the carbonized energy regime in 2008 resulted in an increased evidence of zones saturated with contaminants in the public eyes. In 2010, together with the commencement of a period of demonstrations, new seeds appear within the coal-fired power plant regime. Images of Humboldt penguins, bottlenose dolphins, and endangered native flora and fauna with scientific conservation data are projected via communication media, television personalities, and social networks facilitated the paralysis of the construction of 540 megawatts coal-fired power plants installations. The presidents telephoned the managers of S.3 Energy company to suggest that the project be resituated in spite of the favorable environmental reports. Lessons. Urbanization's experts in government and local administrations were driven to debate these improvised electrifications. The intensity of the problems generated by the electrification of Santiago at the beginning of the 20th century eventually forced business owners into assuming responsible behaviors. It still remains to be proved whether these parasites catalyzed the law of electrification of 1945, requested in Congress and proposing the regulation of disagreements and the chaos of the electrified city. The weakness and fragility of the energy regime following the end of the Argentine gas regime remain in evidence, and for its part the regulated price, like the joker in the pack of cards, gave more negotiating power to the generators in comparison to the consumers. In 2008, the Chilean energy minister proposed a long-term energy policy differentiated from mining policy. A year later, fauna and flora crossing the environmental incidence lines of the coal-fired power plants interfere as parasites in environmental protocols. The telephone call made by the presidents to the business owners of S.3 Energy destabilized and damaged environmental institutionalism and indirectly electricity generation investments. Public demonstrations successfully paralyzed the Barrancones project and heralded the wake-up to citizens after the demonstration escalated against the construction of hydroelectricity dams in Chilean Patagonia. This can be seen as a parasitic cascade. An official commission of experts was named by the president in 2011. In parallel to this, another commission, the Citizen Technical Parliamentary Commission, was created. This report from both commissions target the politicization of processes of expertise concerning energy in Chile. With the purpose of tracking the progress of seats in the history of energy regimes and their sub-regimes, we were impelled to look further to the functional premises of their integrating systems. This means proving how difficult it is to move towards searching for those uninvited guests in the energy regime, those deviated practices able to redistribute power in its core. This change in view within the same regime, surroundings, and in the margin predispose us to search within the unofficial energy-related literature, newspapers of the time, interdisciplinary research, attendance at specialist seminars and ethnographic studies. We also propose that seeds as disruptors can occupy different positions, not always aligning with amigo mesomakrotratary or appearing in protected space as in nature, due to their proposing a deconstructive exercise of the functional logics of selection, distribution, adaptation of the systems. Finally, from this instability represented in the seeds, we propose a descriptive immersion in those vectors capable of chaotic movements, ungoverned, untidy, provoking disturbance in the bodies of the most involved members of the regimes, as the order and future visions of the regimes are challenged with uncertainty. This destabilization caused by the seeds may or may not germinate, moving towards energetic transition in line with the discourse controlled by the co-members. But as we propose here, this also depends on the emergencies which appear and interfere above, below, and through the energy regime, causing it to be overflowed in its daily action. Thank you very much.
So, 3 questions again.
So thank you for the presentation. It's a silly question. You talked about seeds and parallels. I didn't exactly get in your reconstruction of the story. If they are parasites, the leg of the system will be developing the system leading off it. We displace it later on. Are the evidence the actors you described, where they're leading from the regime, or are they more type of seeds that can own their own?
Yeah,
No, if you'd like to, this one is not there.
okay. If I understood the idea as to what is the difference between seeds and parasites in this case, no?
You run on a tight analogy.
Yes, it's an analogy, and it's, for me, well, the first time I found the parasites is so interesting and a so prolific metaphor. But I suppose it seeds because the question is which are the hosts. And the parasites in itself, the host is the universal host is the nature. Yeah? And the universal parasites are we, the human, if I understood this thing. And the seed for me is the analogy that you said, and the regime, because the host for me is the regime, the principal current. And then you need to translate the parasite into the regime metaphor to include, for example, the disaster, the earthquake, the regulated crisis, the path of the judge. There are many things to make visible into the regime. It's maybe a metaphor to translate into, but I need to think more about this.
Yeah, can I just follow up on that? Because I'm still not sure what either analogy actually adds to the analysis. Because coming from a more traditional, I suppose, politics background, the things you mentioned just look like external shocks to the system, which cause change. Sometimes they don't. But both the parasite is that meaning that it feeds off it. And a seed should grow into something.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that either of those kind of developments of the analogy is there in the story that you told. And I wonder what it adds on top of just the shock, the external destabilizing.
Yes. If I understood the question, the parasite is a quasi-object. No? It's in the performance of the regime. When these situations, like the use of the N-wings in this case, or the regulated price, is only in the performative way. And when you stop the play, the performance, you stop to talk about the parasites, because it's the medium. It's the medium. When you stop and you think about what is the translation and what is the results of this, you stop the history. We can talk about more about this.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. All right.
Hi, my name is Vanesa Castan Broto. I'm at University College London, in the Development Unit. I am going to talk today about innovation territories and the politics of energy transition. And apologies for having changed both the name and presentation.
Okay.
On the 20th of July of 2013, Spain woke up to the dazzling news that the government was planning to introduce a tax of 27% for self-generation of energy. For those who, over the years, had invested in renewables at a small scale, this measure constituted a tremendous blow, as it meant that producing your own energy at home was now more expensive than buying it directly from the usual provider. The decision was puzzling, because after a decade of what is seen leadership in the part of Spain towards renewables, now the government seems determined to destroy this incipient market. For the academic from the Barcelona University, Aurelia Maña-Estrada, writing in the blog of anenergy.org, this is an unethical measure which not only compromises the development of renewable technologies, but also is directed towards extracting surplus value from already impoverished energy consumers. According to Maña-Estrada, two companies, which are called Iberdrola and Endesa, actively backed by other three members of the Spanish Association of Power Industries, are and act as an oligopoly. They have captured the state, or at least they control the legislative branch of the Ministry of Industry and Energy. This is what I would say a rather crude example of the way political and economic powers can directly intervene in the sustainable transition through attempts to control the territories over which innovations unfold. While the use of renewables is sanctioned within the existing producing companies, it is limited when it's not fully integrated in the dominant energy markets. This may help the big companies to invest in eolic parks and hydropower, but effectively condemns small-scale generation with, for example, photovoltaic panels. Technological pathways are thus determined by political priorities. The regulation is an attempt to curtail access to new technologies to entrepreneurial citizens. Providing access to alternative technologies becomes an additional way to divide the society and the economy, to sustain existing geographies of, as Maña-Estrada would argue, energy privilege. So all these issues have been studied in transitions theory. In particular, in thinking about the turn from what maybe Marvin and Gerhard called the modern infrastructure ideal, the national provision of energy, to the subsequent liberalization and privatization. Profound transitions have transformed not just the technologies, but also the multiple institutional and territorial arrangements to provide them. Some scholars have already situated these transitions, have already studied these transitions to think of future sustainability pathways. So from a very economic perspective, Fuchs has studied long-term energy transitions in the UK as a model of industrial development, identifying factors that drove substitutions, change, and technology diffusion, including price, service improvement, efficiency, or economies of scale. If you work with engineers, you will hear these arguments mentioned once and again. And then, more familiar to us, there is the scholars of transitions, for example, those engaged with the multi-level perspective. You would be glad to know I'm not going to show you the same graph, you know. Who have identified the multiplicity of drivers and barriers beyond economic ones that have informed previous energy transitions and that may be shaping transitions to renewables today. So, for example, one of the latest studies from Hills and all this community pointed at the political and regulatory influence of the European Union, but also how particular energies have fitted the already existing configuration of technological regimes. And you know, both strands of research have been really influential. But so has been, as we saw this morning, the critique, and in particular the idea that perhaps there's not been so much attention to considerations of space and geography in these theories. So, some thinkers that have influenced me a lot in the latest years in terms of thinking about the space of transition has been Lars Koenen and Bernard Traffer, who have worked on developing what they call the contours of a geography of sustainable transitions. And they call it the contours because it's very much under development. And their argument, perhaps I think, is neatly summarized in this table that they presented in one of their papers, in which they map, on the one hand, issues that belong to the core agenda of transitions, or in other words, that have been already discussed in transitions, but maybe implicitly or explicitly. But they also argue that a deliberate engagement with geography would lead to critical extensions that could help innovate in transitions theory, looking at issues of multiscalarity of power and power. So, to situate my work and my concerns, and as I am coming from this example, the new tax on self-generation in Spain, I tend to gravitate towards the bottom of the page and thinking about how power shapes and is related to transition. So the question is, how can we study power and space in relation to sustainability transition? I think an obvious place to start is perhaps in this notion of technoscapes, and it became popularized by Arjuna Padurai in the late 1990s. And he described technoscapes associated with other scapes: ethnoscapes, financescapes, mediascapes, videoscapes, oilscapes. They are, he argues, the building blocks of what I would like to call emerging worlds, that is, the multiple worlds that are constituted by the historically situated imaginations of persons and groups spread around the world. But as you may recall, Padurai was very concerned with globalization and therefore also very concerned with, as we say, emerging worlds. Perhaps not so much useful to think about technological transition. Luckily for us, other people have been thinking about it, and in particular, I have enjoyed the work of John Ory, who work and Scheller, who have been thinking about technoscapes and what they mean. And particularly related with landscapes. So they say, as landscapes are imbued with power, enabling particular forms of domination and subordination marked out in sites, such as central squares, military fortifications, imposing facades, gates, urban skyscrapers, or rural land holdings, technologies also work in this way. So that's how we can talk about technoscapes. Both material symmetric elements of technoscape result from actions performed in them and shape those very actions. But for me, I see that Barry and his notion of technological zones is what inspires a reading of space in sustainability transitions, because of his ability to bring in the explicitly political into the study of technology. Not just about how technologies divide and travel through the global space, but also how the growing of territories of technologies relates to the strategic, political, and knowledge projects which are overlaid through borders, conventions, and states. So that as you make the state, as you make the territory, you overlay the technology as well. For Barry, rather than take the existence of geographical territory as a given, as a place where technological transitions unfold, its particular historical and cultural significance needs to be investigated. But I am aware here that I'm treading a delicate debate. So I presented this work recently at a regional studies conference, and there you can refer very much to this, which is called the territorial trap by Agnew. What Agnew criticized with this term was a tendency to read territories as bounded and confined to exclusively separated areas, which can easily be ascribed to already operating states, for example. Clearly, it is difficult to sustain that regions can be represented as territorially fixed in any essential sense. So we need to develop the notion of territory if we want to action it to the study of sustainability transitions. So I find useful for this to engage with the idea of territory as a political technology, particularly the work that Stuart has done, and also very much resonating with Foucauldian ideas of governmentality and so on. So what Stuart argues is that territory is a political technology. It means a technology that comprises techniques for measuring land and controlling terrain. One in which the technical and the legal, the way territory is ordained, can be seen alongside the economic and strategic projects that order space, so that as you produce territory, you use some technologies and you deploy some technologies that construct it. Territory emerges from the process of drawing boundaries and organizing space through different calculated procedures. And here's where the influence of Foucault is strong. How can we relate this to sustainability transitions? There's explicit work that does this by Joe Pointer, who has seen territories as the outcome of network socio-technical practices. This means that to look into the relationship between technologies and spaces, one needs not to look at how spatial patterns influence the formation of technologies, or how technologies produce particular spatial patterns, but as if one would constitute each other. But rather, the interest is what is generating those technological transitions and spatial patterns simultaneously. What are the factors that led to the consolidation of territories and to the changes in technological transitions? So for me, the relationship has three different aspects, and which link the territorial aspects of sustainable energy transitions. First of all, the first point there, sustainable energy transitions develop over given territories, and thus, part of the effort to bring about such transitions consists of demonstrating that those technologies are possible, and that they are possible within given locations. Something that in my work with Harry Buckley we've referred to as maintenance. So those technologies are inserted within a given landscape, a given socio-technical landscape or technoscape. A key part of maintenance is the calculation and simultaneous ordering of space, technologies, and population. Moreover, the constitution of technological assemblages requires the development of imagined territories. So it's not just the drawing of the boundary or space, but also the imagination of what that territory means. Such territories can be associated with discourses of modernization, or economic competitiveness, but they are also influenced by discourses of national identity and other cultural values that can be inscribed in particular territories, and therefore in the transitions, in the technological transitions themselves. And finally, with regards to my third point, the production of technological innovation territories also leads to the production of patterns of access and exclusion. This is not just in relation to access to a particular resource of energy, for example, who has access to electricity, but also in relation to access and control the innovation itself. So what type of innovation is allowed? So for example, now in Spain, they are limiting decentralization of energy, and they are promoting decentralization. So I'm going to try to explain this with reference to an example. This is theory development. I've gone back to familiar territory, my hometown in Huesca, which I've been studying for a while through archival research, reviews of archives, and interviews. So I want to make you travel back back to maybe the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, in which in Western the Pyrenees there was a very strong territorial project in the Pyrenees, which were configured as reservoirs of people and resources. There was an escalation of construction of dams for hydropower under the dictatorship of Franco, and that led to a growing interest in controlling the region and its transformation. Many local villages had then their own supply of energy in the small mills, in the small water mills, until well into the 1960s. But their operation was subsumed by the provision of centralized energy by state-owned companies. So, in terms of my first point, technological maintenance and the control of population, this technological project of reordering the space through the construction of dams, hydropower, and irrigation was simultaneously developed together with a profound territorial project. One that focused on concentrating development in lowland, fertile areas to which the mountain population had to be relocated. So people from the mountains had to be put in lowlands to cultivate the land, so the mountains would be available to accumulate water and create energy. Yeah. So the graph there in the screen, if you can see it, I'm not sure if you can see it very well, but in essence, it shows that from the 50s to the 70s there was a process of depopulation. This is in one single valley. That the population included the deliberate destruction of property in residential areas. Even there are cases of the bombing of schools by the Guardia Civil, and the dismembering of valleys, which provided the connective fabric of the area. So these valleys were flooded, therefore everybody had to move, and the valleys were left empty for irrigation and hydropower. This process was accompanied by a calculated project, one that involved topographic surveys, road making and cartography, but also involved the establishment of symbols of control, like the construction of infrastructure sometimes, but sometimes less obvious symbols, like, for example, the big chalets that were built for engineers that were completely different from the traditional construction in those villages. In relation to the issue of the need for imaging technological territories, there's no doubt that the project of electrifying the Pyrenees in Huesca was accompanied of the prospects of huge profits for the construction and also for the power companies which were involved. But in fact, you'll be surprised, there was little reference to the rhetoric of economic development in the work of those who defended this giant territorial project. Instead, what we find here is a discourse of communalism that follows the regenerationist impulse, which was a political movement in Spain in the late 19th century, which was directed towards recovering or restoring the old glory which supposedly had accompanied the birth of the nation state. And that was something which was not only during Franco years, but it came from before, from the 19th century. Here, the figure of Joaquín Costa, who was from the region which was to be transformed, was invoked as drawing on rivers as the blood of Spain, from which its impoverished farmers could drink, but also from which its big power companies could grow. Costa became the figure that established water management as an issue of national interest. He said, "We have immense reservoirs of water in the mountains, and we can still them with mathematical regularity." And here you see the calculated impulse as well. So we can still them with mathematical regularity onto our country, crossing it with an arterial hydraulic system that mitigates its heat and thirst, and what would and powers it, because it would be, the whole system would be peppered with hydraulic works for the production of energy. Here we see the constitution of territory through calculation, aiming at developing mathematical regularity, and one that works very much on Spanish peace and identity, through bringing together the interests of farmers for irrigation and those of the nascent energy industry. Thank you. In regards to access to technology and the production of just to be brief, what follows is a landscape in which those who have access to technologies can take advantage from them. But not just in determining who gets energy and who doesn't, but also in explaining how that particular provision of energy is going to take place. And with this, we see a disregard for those small mills that have been providing energy to very remote areas in Pyrenees, prioritizing instead the universal supply that paradoxically didn't cover as much terrain. So overall, this highlights the key role that the concept of territory may play in understanding power and sustainable transition. For example, through the calculations involved in maintaining technological territories and the control of populations, through the production of imagined technological territories, and through the consequent reduction of inequalities in the access of technology. I also think that my example, coming back to my point of departure, highlights that the government of Mariano Rajoy knows very well what they are doing with this exclusionary and essential territorial policy directed at renewable energy innovation. I think it's the logical conclusion of a century-old energy policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
I'd like to know if there has been any reaction from associations of small producers to the introduction of this new tax.
There have been, but I don't know the detail.
It has been introduced very recently.
Yeah, in July.
This example, follow up on that, maybe Gloria here from the Netherlands, there was also a proposal to have tax on supply of produce. Because now there is maybe also a Dutch covenant made. This taxing is less threatening for suppliers. But still, I think there is a danger because you don't tax when you have your own garden, produce from your garden, you can eat it, it's not taxed. So where does it end? Is this also discussed in a regulatory way, as far as you know?
Yeah, that's exactly the justification. As far as I know, I think they've introduced that tax on the grounds that since that technology has developed, now it should be contributed back to the economy. But as you may identify, well, the big companies get good breaks, don't they? So there's a high balance, and you may say anything about your work about the arguments for doing this policy, but I do regard it as a way of perpetuating the power of the big companies. This is not unique to Spain anymore.